Hi everyone, and welcome. It's so nice to see so many of you here. If you would like to ask questions during this session, you can do so in the chat, or there's also a dedicated Q&A session if you want to ask them privately. This session is recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you are free to leave the session if you wish to. But with no further ado, welcome, Timmy. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Tobias. Happy to be here with everyone. So we have a lot of things to go through in this session here, so we're gonna try to keep the pace up here. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Timmy Anderson. I'm actually 35 years old today, so I'm really happy to be spending the day here together with all of you guys, since it's my birthday and it's the Modern Endpoint Management Summit of 2022. It's awesome. And I am a freelance consultant and also a Microsoft MVP within Enterprise Mobility plus Security, which usually covers the Endpoint Manager point of view within Microsoft. I have a history of working with client management for the past maybe, it's over 10 years now, 12, 13 years maybe. And I also started out working with Microsoft products with SCCM back in 2012 or around that time frame. So my background comes from managing, first of all, starting out managing PCs, and then over the last couple of years, 4 or 5 years, it's been more and more evolving into not only PCs, but also how do we manage our Android devices? How do we manage our iOS devices, Mac OS, and all the different types of devices that we have out there. So in this session today, we're going to focus on managing Android and iOS devices. And the agenda for today is pretty simple. We're going to start out talking a little bit about Android. We're going to then cover iOS, and then we're going to go through a little bit of the key takeaways from this session here. And then we're going to wrap up and end with the Q&A session. But as Tobias mentioned here earlier, feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we will try to ask them as we go during the session here. So let's start out with what we have here with managing Android devices. So the Android ecosystem is, I wouldn't call it complex, but we have a lot of different pieces in it that we need to think about when we manage our devices. So you might be aware of that there are a lot of Android phones out there, and these comes in different shapes, form, and sizes. We have Google's own Pixel line. We have Samsung manufacturing devices. We have Xiaomi, and yeah, the spectrum of Android devices there is pretty huge. So this is just something that we need to keep in mind when we manage these devices, that there are so many different flavors out there. And that comes with some positive things, and it also comes with some harder challenges at times. But the Android ecosystem is not just about the phones we use. It could also be the tablets that we're using. I've been working a lot with customers that maybe have tablets in their organization. That could be a kiosk device standing out there in a reception, for example, or in a library, or wherever it can be. And though they are similar to our phones that we use, we need to also have a way of managing these types of devices. And we also have wearables. Though we cannot necessarily manage the wearables by itself, but we need to be aware of that the wearables are actually connecting to our devices that we are actually managing. So if you have a watch, a smartwatch, and you have that connected to your phone, and on your phone you might have your Outlook or your email accounts or everything like that, you might get a notification on your watch about the emails and stuff like that. And that is also something we need to keep in mind when we manage devices. How is information and how do we secure the information, not just across one device, but multiple devices that might be connected to the device we are actually using. So that is pretty exciting. And we have also a lot of meeting room devices. These are usually dedicated Teams meeting room devices that is running Android on the OS level. That's maybe sitting in a conference room. Maybe some of you guys out there now is actually sitting in a meeting room with the Teams meeting devices that is running Android, joining in and being with us here today. So this is why the Android ecosystem is pretty exciting, because we have all of these different types that we need to actually consider. This doesn't necessarily mean that we need to manage everything at once, or just saying that now we manage Android and everything, but just keep that in mind that many different things out here, and we need to be able to understand how it all plays together. So some just basic things within Endpoint Manager, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, is that when we want to enroll our devices into Endpoint Manager, as of right now, the minimum operating system that is supported from Microsoft is Android 8 and higher. So that's Android Oreo, meaning that any version below than that, so Android 7 and stuff like that, for MDM enrollment, so actually enrolling our device into Intune, is not supported. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it will not work. I've seen cases where it actually kind of works fine, but you are in a unsupported state. So it's not something I would recommend. It's not something I recommend to my customers I work with. Because just like we do on the Windows side of things, we need to be keeping up with the supported version of the operating system. And there is no difference here between a Windows PC and an Android device, or even an iOS device for that matter. There is one exception though for Microsoft, and that is the actual Microsoft Teams Android devices. So regardless if these devices are running Android 8 or higher, they are actually supported. So, but that is the only exception to this. So what I've seen with some Microsoft Teams devices is that some of them is actually running like version 7.1 of Android, but they are still supported from Microsoft. But that is, of course, because it's closely integrated to the product and everything like that. But it's just important to keep that in mind. We also then have the MAM part of the equation here, and for app protection policies. And here we actually need to be on Android 9 and higher. And that is usually because the application itself that handles the app protection policy requires Android 9 or higher for one or another reason. So keep this in mind when we talk about MDM enrollment. We have one version we need to be aware of, and when we're doing MAM policies, we have another version we need to be aware of. And on that topic on MDM and MAM, I just quickly want to brief over this scenario here, because I get a lot of questions about this, and sometimes there can be a little bit of confusing what the difference is, but essentially MDM versus MAM is that with MDM, mobile device management, we can manage essentially the entire device. We have the control over the device in some way or form. But for the MAM part, the mobile application management, we don't manage the device itself. We only manage the application running on the device. So that could be Outlook, for example. So if we take a look at this example here, what would happen in a MAM scenario would be that the end user starts out with installing Outlook. So if we look on the left side here on the slide, the user installs Outlook. They then sign in with their corporate credentials, and that authentication gets pushed, redirected to Azure AD to then perform, hey, is this a real user in our organization? And The sign-in also then triggers kind of a lookup in Intune to see, do we have any app protection policies for this specific app? And if there is a app protection policy for Outlook, for example, then that policy gets pushed down to the application locally on the device. And that could be that the user then is required to set a PIN code on the app to get access to their email. Or it could be depending on if it's how they are allowed to back up their data, if it's the backup to the cloud is blocked or whatever it can be. But this is important in an MDM versus MAM scenario, that we can understand that managing the device is MDM, managing the application is MAM, essentially. So with that, we are going to take a look at what are the different options we have for Android devices. And we're going to cover Android Enterprise specifically in this session, mostly because that is the most common one that's being used out there. There are a few other things that we could cover, but we don't really have time today, so we need to speed things up. But essentially what we can do when we want to manage our Android devices is we start out on the left side here on the slide, and we can see that we can start out with a MAM policy or an app protection policy. This is usually used for a personally owned device where we don't need the control of our device, and we can then just apply MAM policies to Outlook, OneDrive, and all the supported apps that we have that can work with a app protection policy. The next step from there is the work profile. So this means that the user will technically go into the Play Store, install Company Portal, and during the installation and when they fire up the app, they will go through an enrollment process. And what happens on the device is it's going to create two different profiles on the device. You have one personal profile where all the personal data and apps and everything like that will be contained. And then we have a work profile where all the work-related data will be contained. And for us as administrators or IT pros, that means that we can manage what's inside the work profile, but we can't look or see or touch anything that's in the personal profile. So if the end user is taking photos of their dogs or kids or whatever it can be, we don't have access to that because that's on the personal side of the phone, not the actual work profile of the phone. And then we will come into talking about company-owned devices. Company-owned devices is essentially when the organization owns the device. So the organization has bought the device for the end user to be used for work-related properties. And here we have corporate owned with work profile. So this is pretty similar to the previous one with only work profile. However, we have some more control over it because we actually own the device. And this has been starting to get very popular. A lot of customers I'm working with are adopting this one here. And it's mainly used for information workers who needs to have the device and also have it being their personal phone maybe. So if they bring their device home at the end of the workday and they can still use it with their personal stuff they have going on in their life. Then we have the fully managed device, which is mainly the idea behind this is more that maybe you are a nurse working or you are some kind of worker where you have a dedicated, well, not necessarily a dedicated device, but a device that you are only using for work-related stuff. It has no other purpose. You're not supposed to be using it in a personal way. You're not supposed to take photos of your cats or dogs. You're not supposed to be having your own personal apps on it either. It's only meant to be able to do work in one form or another. And at the end here, we have the dedicated devices. And these are usually devices that is not tied to one specific user. A lot of warehouses are using dedicated devices for scanning barcodes maybe. It could also be a tablet standing in a reception somewhere where there is, again, it's not tied to a specific user, but it still needs to be managed, and it's running maybe a single app in a kiosk mode, or running multiple apps for that matter. That could also be the possibility. We also have something that's called shared AD mode as well. We can actually have where multiple users can sign into the device and log out. So there are many possibilities here, but the dedicated device is more aimed to where there's not supposed to be a specific user. Anyone should be able to take that device and perform some task or another thing on it. And the question then is, how do we actually make sure that we can select between these different modes? And I just want to quickly show you a pretty simple decision tree, which is it's a good starting point if you're not sure where you should go with the types of devices that you're managing. So we can start up at the top and say the first question we have here is, who owns the device? So this is well, it's very important, because it means is it owned by the user, or is it owned by the organization and the company that we work for? And if we say that no, well, this device we are having right here is a personally owned device, then we go down to the next question down here, which is, do we need some device level control or not on this specific device? And if the answer is no, we don't need any device level control, then we can end up with an app protection policies and doing a MAM scenario on that specific device. However, if we, on the other hand, we actually, well, we kind of need device control on this device. Maybe we need to push out the certificate to be connecting to our Wi-Fi or whatever it can be. That means that we need device level control. And then the answer is yes. And then we can end up with a work profile. So this specific decision tree here is just aimed to be able to help you navigate the waters here. It's not like set in stone or anything. It's just going to give you some sort of guidance on how can you think about when you want to manage your device, and what way should you be able to go with it. And the next thing here, once we're actually managing our devices and we are working within Endpoint Manager, and we can create policies here and we can create policies here depending on what it is. One thing that is important to remember is that not all policies can be applied to the type of device that you have been enrolled, depending on what enrollment scenario you were using, essentially. So if we take a look at this example here, we have a device restriction policy, and we have, for example, screen capture, block, or not configure. We can see at the top here that this will apply to fully managed devices, dedicated or corporate-owned work profile devices. And if we take a look at the next setting here, we have these sets of controls that we have is only we are only able to do these controls on fully managed and dedicated devices. So this is really important when we create our policies and stuff like that, to understand that the different types of devices we are managing in the different scenarios also then reflects on what types of policy we can actually be doing or applying to that specific device. So just because it works for a dedicated device doesn't mean it will work on a personally owned with work profile, for example. So just keep that in mind when you're working with policies and things like that. The next important topic here is Android Zero Touch. And I don't know how many of you guys maybe are familiar with Autopilot, so Windows Autopilot, where essentially what we can do is, from Microsoft's point of view, is that we can pre-register a PC, and then we can actually automatically get that PC to register and join into Azure AD and also into Intune, so we can manage the device. So Android has a very similar approach to this, and that is called Zero Touch, where it essentially works in the same way, where you as an organization, you can buy a device from a vendor. The device gets pre-registered, And then you can specify which tenant or Intune tenant should you point that device to. Maybe you have multiple tenants or something like that. But this kind of gives us the control that we need from an organization point of view when we actually own the device. And it's not a personal device or bring your own device that the user comes with when they start working. And we're going to take a look on a few things here around the zero touch. So maybe not all of you have seen the zero touch portal, but again, it's a URL that you go to and you log in with the credentials that you have for the zero touch. The zero touch enrollment actually starts with the vendor needs to invite you as an organization to zero touch. So there is no application process in that sense, but you need to go to your vendor or OEM where you buy your devices from and ask them, hey, I want to take part of zero touch. Can you invite me into that program? And they can just do that. And once you're in, you will have all your devices registered if you have told the OEM and vendor to pre-register the device. The devices will show up in a list with the IME or serial number in the list. And then you will, for every device, or you can also do this in bulk, of course, but you will assign a configuration to that device. So meaning just showing the device that, hey, when you come online for the first time and you get connected to the internet, you will download a profile and that will tell the device where it should be enrolling. So I just want to quickly show a quick demo here on zero touch in action. So this is a Samsung device. We are starting it up for the first time. And we're just going through the simple steps that it is for setting up a device. So we choose what language we want to use. We connect to a Wi-Fi. And then the phone, when we see here it's getting ready, it actually goes out to the internet. It talks to the Android services out there to check, hey, am I actually registered in any zero touch environment out there? And if yes, it's going to show up and pop up, say, yep, this device is managed by a or an organization. And then we will just continue on. And the enrollment into Endpoint Manager and Intune will then happen automatically based on the configuration that we have configured within Zero Touch. And this, again, is very similar to Windows Autopilot. And we have also something equivalent on the Apple side of you, which we will come to a little bit later here in this session. But it's just important to understand that it's not always Windows PCs that we can manage in this way. It's also our mobile devices. And during the enrollment, during the zero touch process, what happens again is just that the device gets redirected to the correct MDM system and then gets automatically enrolled. The device we're looking at is a dedicated device. So meaning I will never be prompted to enter any username or password for the enrollment. The enrollment will just automatically happen. But if I were set it to a profile where I am tying up the device to a specific user, then I will get prompted with logging in with my credentials, of course. But now the enrollment process is done and the device is up and running. And now I can start using the phone. And after this, all the policies will be coming down from Intune. It will install the company portal. It will install any other apps that we have, and also then applying the policies that we have assigned to this specific device. Within the Zero Touch portal, we usually create multiple configurations, depending on if we are enrolling a dedicated device or are we enrolling a fully managed device or whatever it can be. So this means that we will have multiple different types of configurations within the Zero Touch portal. And the reason for that is for each enrollment, we have a unique token that we get from the Endpoint Manager portal that we need to copy out, and then we just paste it into our configuration here. And the configuration looks something like this. So this is usually what we are working with is what's called a DPC extra. So the DPC extra is essentially the profile that the phone downloads when it gets connected to the internet and it realizes, hey, I'm assigned to a zero touch and assigned to an organization here. It downloads the configuration and it looks something like this. The one I have blacked out here in the corner, that is the actual enrollment token, which is unique for every customer and every type of enrollment. So it's just not just one token. Everyone has their own unique token that you need to be able to paste in here and applying to the configuration. But I just want to cover a few of the most common ones that I've been using, which is pretty neat here, is that one configuration, if we take a look on the first one here, is called provisioning leave all system apps enabled false. I have a slide after this that's going to show you what the difference are for having that turned true or false. We then have the provisioning locale. So this means that if the user selects a language during the setup, we can actually overwrite that setting. So in this case here, for this specific profile, I'm actually overriding whatever input the user selected in the out-of-box experience to be set to E and US, regardless of what they pick. And this is usually used in a dedicated scenario where you might want to lock it down, but you don't have to put this configuration in there. You can just leave it out and just have the user selecting the language they want themselves and not caring about it. And then the last one here on row number 4, that is essentially the mandatory configuration you need to be able to point it to your Intune tenant in the first place. So that one you will always be having in there in the configuration. But if we look on the leave all system apps enable, you will see here on the 2 screens that on the left side, we have the true, and on the right side, we have false. And on the home screen here, there are 3 obvious things that are different. We have, for example, on the true side here, we have a widget that is not present when we set it to false. We also have 2 apps down here, Galaxy Store and the Gallery, that is also not present when we turn off the system apps during the enrollment process. So again, this is usually used when we want to enroll maybe dedicated devices and we don't want all the system apps to be used or be available for the end users. And also, if we look on what types of other apps that we are not getting when we turn it on and off is something like this. So we don't get the Netflix app. We are not getting the game launcher or anything like that comes with the the phone just directly from the vendor. So depending on what the vendor pre-populates, we can use this one here to turn those off if we want to already during the zero touch enrollment, which is pretty cool and comes pretty much in handy. So that kind of covers the Android part. I know we are going at a very quick phase here, but we have a lot of information we need to go through. And it's time to talk a little about iOS and iPad OS. So in the iOS ecosystem, we mainly are working with iPhones, iPads, and maybe even iPods, if you have seen those in the wild recently. I don't think I've seen an iPod in 5 or 6 years, but they are still out there. And we can manage all of these types of devices. And we want to do that in a similar way like we're managing our Android devices, but there are some certain things that is a little bit more different in iOS. Again, because it's a different ecosystem and Apple is doing their own thing and Google and Android is doing their thing. And then Microsoft is just tapping into the MDM capabilities that is available for those ecosystems. And those change, of course, with different versions of the OS and stuff like that. And a general rule of thumb here is when we are working with iOS and iPadOS, it's iOS version 13. I think the latest version I installed on my iPhone I have here besides me is 15.4.1, I believe it is. So iOS 13 is a couple years old, but what the supported version essentially is iOS 13. There are some nuances to this, and that's because it gets a little bit complicated when it comes to apps running on iOS, because usually it's the app that needs support for a specific OS version, not always the MDM system that supports the OS version itself. So it can get a little bit tricky, but a good rule of thumb is keep all the devices that you have on iOS on 13 or higher. And the different types of enrollment we can do on iOS also looks a little bit different compared to Android. But the good thing here is that if we start on the left side, we have the app protection policies and the MAM policies. So this is again is a good starting point where we only want to manage the application and not the entire phone or parts of the phone. This is often used in a bring your own device scenario for many organizations I've been working with, is that, okay, we don't want to manage the entire device, but we want to make sure that Outlook is secure, OneDrive is secured, and so on. The next step from app protection policy here is user enrollment. User enrollment, to be honest, I'm not seeing that much out there being used by organizations. There are many reasons for that, but usually what I see is most organizations go for number 3 here, which is the device enrollment, if it's not registered or a company-owned device. So if it's a personal device, they will go for device enrollment, and the process is very simple. It's just the user going out to the store, downloading company portal, going through the enrollment process, and then they are managed, and the organization can manage the device. And we have technically a little bit more options what we can do on the device compared to on Android. But this is very common out there that we see device enrollment. And then further to the right, we have the automated device enrollment. And this is the one that is actually more representable of the same capabilities we have with Android Zero Touch and Windows Autopilot. This is where the device is actually pre-registered when you bought the device in something that's called Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. And then what you can do is you point that device to your MDM system, and this is where we get the most control when we want to manage our corporate devices. So a lot of organizations out there might already have Apple Business Manager or School Manager, but sometimes it's just that they have used that maybe for an older MDM system, or now they want to actually use it, pointing it to Endpoint Manager and Intune to be able to manage their devices. Again, I covered this very, very quickly here, but we have 2 portals essentially, Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. And that depends on what type of organizations you are. And so again, if you are a school or a learning institute, you will probably have School Manager. And if you are a corporate owned, if you're a corporate, essentially, you will go for the business side. And those 2 portals are very similar. It's just the login screen that looks a little bit different. And on the school side, you have a little bit more you can do with students and managing their Apple ID and more classroom related things than you have on the Business Manager. But other than that, they are pretty much identical. So if you don't have Apple Business Manager today or Apple School Manager, here are some good information for you. because you need to apply for this directly to Apple. There is a form that you will fill out online and send that in to Apple. But there are some very crucial information that needs to be provided when you do this process. So if you want to apply for the Apple Business Manager, you need something that's called a DUNS number. And a DUNS number is technically a global organization number for your specific organization. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out what your DUNS number actually is. But one life hack that I've learned is that talk to the people in accounting or finance. They usually know what the DUNS number is and what it is for that specific organization. And once you have that, you can complete the application and just send that into Apple, and you will get a reply back if you're accepted or not. For Apple School Manager, you don't need the DUNS number because a school doesn't have a DUNS number. But in some situations, you might need to be able to prove to Apple that you are actually a school or a learning institute. And that can that can be a little bit different depending on what it is. But I've never seen anyone being rejected, just that Apple sometimes have a few follow-up questions that you need to answer when you do the application for Apple Business Manager or for Apple School Manager. And one more thing is that the application process can take some time. I know some customers I've been working with, they think that, okay, if we apply for the portal on Thursday, we will have access on Monday. And no, that's not the case. What I've seen from all the applications that I've done is that it usually takes between 2 or 3 weeks. From that, you have filed the first application, and Apple has gone through it, reviewed it, come back to you, and you have answered any follow-up questions and stuff like that. Within 2 or 3 weeks, you will have access to the portal. Sometimes it has actually been taking longer, but that is usually because the first application wasn't really, they were missing some information or anything like that. So just keep that in mind that if you apply for this, it will take a few weeks probably before you have access. And
just to let
if you all,
you know,
yes, sorry.
Just to let you know, Timmy, we have 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. I just want to talk quickly about this. So if you already have Apple Business Manager today, last week, actually, on March 31st, Apple updated their terms of service. So you need to go in and actually approve the terms of service if you haven't already done it. Because if you don't do that, you will no longer be able to enroll any devices or install any applications from Apple Business Manager. So keep that in mind. If you haven't approved it, go in today and approve the new terms of services. And within the actual portal, it looks pretty much the same, but Apple has changed a little bit about the icons and stuff that we have within the portal. But everything is pretty much the same, just a little bit of UI update and refresh. And since we're running out of time, I just quickly want to show you that this is the enrollment process for Apple Business Manager. So here we have a device again, just like the Android phone. We are starting out from the out-of-box experience. The user selects their language and their country or region that they are from. They might need to unlock their SIM card, of course. And once they go through the out-of-box experience here, the device, once connected to the internet, goes out and retrieves the configuration that you have. So you can see here that this device is remote managed by an organization. And then it downloads the profiles and it automatically enrolls the device into your Intune tenant and Endpoint Manager. So this is, I really like this because now we have 3 ways we can do that for, not only for Windows PCs, but we can do it for Android devices, and we can also do that for iOS devices and also Mac OS for that matter. So yeah, I think we're gonna just wrap it up there and go to the Q&A part of the session here. So I don't know, Tobias, have you been able to answer any questions in the chat here, or have you seen any interesting questions popping up? I'm just going to go through the chat here to see if I can find any.
Sorry, I guess I was muted.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we do have a few questions.
Okay,
for example, awesome. Zero-touch enrollment. Are we only able to use that on Android Enterprise?
Yes, correct. Only Android Enterprise that is supported.
Next question, how can we force a MAM policy refresh on a device?
Ooh, that's a tricky question. So what I've seen from experience is that you just need, well, forcing it's hard because it's depending on when the device checks in, if there is a policy. It's been a long time since I looked into it, but from what I can remember, the documentation said that a new policy update or refresh is like within 8 or 12 hours, something like that. I don't know if Microsoft has updated that. So, because again, it's been a while since I had a look at that, but I don't know of any way where we can actually force it remotely. Locally on the device, we could probably just uninstall the app and install it again, but usually we want some remote control for that, and I don't know of anything on top of my head. Sorry.
Thank you. Next question. What would you say is the most common iOS deployment type, ADE or device enrollment?
It depends on the organization. If they have Apple Business Manager or School Manager, ADE is without a doubt the most common way. The device enrollment is usually used in a bring your own device scenario where the device is not registered in Apple Business or School Manager. So that's mainly the two differences between them.
From Alex here, is it possible to upload existing devices into Google Zero Touch?
The vendor, well, no. So we, as the organization or IT admins, we cannot do that. The only one who can upload a device into Zero Touch is the manufacturer or the vendor who sold you the device. So yeah. But I would love to have that feature, but yeah, sorry that it's not something we have right now.
Yeah, we finally got it for Macs in ABM, so
yeah,
hopefully
exactly.
Google gets there as well. So let's see, what else do we have? We have a few questions here. I'm just trying to organize myself in the list.
Yeah.
What are the options to authenticate in Android? If I have all devices registered in Kiosk, can I use my company email address for this purpose instead of a Google account?
It depends on what you mean with authentication here. Because when you set up Android Enterprise for the first time, Google essentially have two different paths you can go when you create your Android Enterprise account. And one way to go is to use the Google services, but then you're losing everything you have on Microsoft, on the Microsoft end of you. Or you do what we usually do when we're working with Endpoint Manager and Azure AD and all of that. I just can't remember they have two different names. I just can't remember that on top of my head. But for a dedicated device anyway, you usually don't have any authentication when you enroll it, at least. if you're using Android Enterprise, because that's the token automatically enrolls the device into Endpoint Manager.
Thank you. Great answer. Let's see. I think we have a few more here. So do you know if Microsoft is developing more supported applications in the shared Azure AD shared device mode?
Well, the short answer would be, I hope so. I don't have any direct insights to that right now, but yes, because one of the problems with the shared mode right now is that the application itself also needs to support this option. And that has been the headache with that in the past, at least, that many customers that I've been working with is that they look at the shared mode and they say, yes, that's exactly what we want. And they start testing it out. And then they realize, but this app here, X, Y, and Z, they don't work because they don't support the shared mode. So I really hope that we will see some improvement on that side soon, because that's going to be huge for many organizations if that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for a few more questions here. They are rolling in as we speak.
Yeah. Just keep on posting the questions.
So let's see. How do we troubleshoot if the iOS device is stuck on configuring iPhone, iPad page post passing the remote management authentication?
Yeah, that's a good tricky one. Yeah. And sadly, to my knowledge, the only way to, well, essentially troubleshoot it is you need physical access to the device. And I'm trying to remember when I've seen that popping up. Because the first thing I always try if I end up in that scenario is like, okay, I need to factory reset the device. I've seen sometimes when you do a soft reset, the profile don't get deleted on the device, and you're going to end up in the same problem again during the next boot and enrollment. But I think the solution there was, from my end, was to reset it while I had it connected to Apple Configurator. And from Apple Configurator, when I did a reset from there, it actually wiped everything. I can't really explain why that worked and the other one didn't work, but yeah. That's management, managing devices for you.
I've been in that position myself a few times. Okay, let's take one more. Any tips for obtaining a DUNS number if you want to learn more about Apple Business Manager?
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky one and something I had to do myself. But the short answer is that you need to be an organization. At least, so I'm based in Sweden. So what we do here in Sweden is that we need a what's called an aktiebolag, which is an entity, a corporate entity, and you need to create that before you can even get the DUNS number. So it's not something that a regular person just can go out and get, to my knowledge at least. But what I would do is maybe see if you can talk to the people within the organization you work within, and see if you can figure that one out somehow.
Cool. Thank you very much, Timmy. And for those questions that we did not answer, we will try to collect as many questions as possible and provide answers for them later as well.
Yes. And thank you so much, guys, for attending this session here. I'm super happy to be here with you guys. As I said, it's my birthday, and yeah, really excited to be spending the day with you here, guys.
Happy birthday, Timmy.
Yeah, thank you. So get ready for the next session that's coming up, whatever you're gonna watch next. But again, post your questions and we're gonna follow up on them. And yeah, thank you, everyone.